We actually live? Is it for
Yep.
real? And then I have to wait for either the people that are trolling in the comments or the people that are actually legit. And I can see that we are live. It takes me a bit for my video to show up. So I know that we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Making Awesome Podcast, Season 3, Episode 7, where I know you all. It's a little bit odd for me to have guests. It's been a while, but we have the fabulous Nick with us. He is a therapist and a maker, which is awesome because that means that we can talk about all things making, all things therapy, and be able to have an honest conversation where traditionally it's a difficult thing, right?
Oh, for sure. The discussion about therapy and the stigma around mental health in the United States and actually globally. I've had the ability to work with some teams internationally, but to hear that as kind of an ongoing thing, no matter where you happen to be, is huge.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And real
love
quick,
conversations.
can we back up just a hair? Because I did screw
Oh,
up. I'm
absolutely.
supposed to ask you to give me the Backstreet Boys, the who you are, the where you from, the what you did, and as long as you love me.
So, as you had pointed out, name is Nick Ange. I am Maine born and bred, and for the most part raised, minus a short period of time, 8 years or so, living in Philadelphia when I was in school.
Oh, I'm so
Um,
sorry.
oh, look, I like Philly. There's something about Philly. It's got this like grittiness is the best way that I can describe it, and
I
the
called it
people
getting
there.
cussed at everywhere I went.
Look, the people there love their city. There is Philadelphians. I will take nothing away from them regarding that. Even
Mhm.
though, as a football fan, their Eagles did beat my Patriots in a Super Bowl not that long
I
ago.
mean, that is fair. Also, thank you to Russ for the $20 super chat, dude. Thank you so much for your support of the channel. And I've got a shirt coming to you relatively soon. I just got them in, so we're gonna be shipping those out next week. So thank you again, Russ, for your support.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, while I was in Philadelphia, I spent 5 years at Drexel, getting my bachelor's in psychology, and that's 5 years because Drexel is a co-op school. So you do your second, third, and fourth year, you do half year of schooling, half year of work. So you kind of get a feel for what you want to do after.
Hmm.
And then because I loved Philly so much and had no problem getting cussed out occasionally, I stayed for another 2 years and I went to Temple and got my master's in counseling psychology at Temple. And then shortly thereafter, the Patriots were doing really well. The Red Sox were doing really well. And it was really hard to go to a sporting event in the city. And I was like, all right, it's time to move back home. Like-minded people, it's just safer.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, and I'm looking in the chat and I see Adam Phantom saying the Eagles booed Santa Claus. Yes, they did. They absolutely did. They threw an ice ball at Jimmy Johnson. There have been lots of things. It is. I think it's the only stadium, and I might be wrong about this. So anybody from Philadelphia can correct me. But the vet, the old stadium, had a courtroom beneath it so that they could immediately do the court proceedings for fans who were rowdy or out of control. Um, there was, let's call it a charm to that whole scenario. So,
That area was very charming. The stop signs are apparently only supposed to be yielding because every time I
oh, there
stopped
are
at one, I got
suggestions.
cussed at. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're suggestions. Don't
I'm like,
actually stop.
I am from
It's just
out
a
of town in
suggestion.
a rental with Florida tags on it. I am stopping at the stop signs. Thank you.
That's
If
a
I'd
good
gotten a
call.
rental with, somewhere in the Northeast when we were up at Earth and not a rental with Florida tags, sure, I get it, right? But the guy with the out of town tags clearly is not from this area. Yeah, we're going to have a problem. Let's follow the rules for a bit.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, it has been a struggle, right? And you're a maker yourself, and in fact,
Yeah,
you're married to a maker as well,
I am.
and
I
you're
am
two
the
doors down from the
from
man,
a
the
from
maker
from
himself.
a man. Yeah, exactly. Right. So for those who don't know, Grant is referring to Matt Stoltz, the head of community at Prussia,
Yep.
lives two doors down from us, and he and his amazing wife are both makers, doing some amazing things. And then my fantastic wife, some of you may know, Lauren, from A Buzz Designs and now Burnish.co, has kind of made a side business out of making for the past 5 years, 6 years, I believe, when we think about it.
Yeah, and
And the making.
mods, feel free to drop those links in the chat, please.
Yeah.
Give her the
And
love.
making consists of a lot in this home. I mean, we've got a Thunder Nova downstairs, we've got the Prusias, we've got our original FlashForge Creator Pro, the first printer we bought. We've cobbled together some printers. I've turned an ANET into a functioning non-burning machine.
Oh, well, that's
Um,
fun.
yeah, it was quite impressive actually. It's more Prussian now than it is an ANET. It's kind of like Vader. It's more machine now than it was its original form.
That's fair.
Beyond that, we've got a CNC in the garage. I do a tad bit of welding. I'll spend some time on a wood lathe, a metal lathe. So there's lots of making that goes on
It is making is a totally different thing because with the advent of social media and everything that's come out of it, now it's not just I like what I do and I enjoy it and you can just share it with your local community at, a yard sale or a farmer's market or whatever. Now you can post things online, but that also brings in the direct, oh, I'm either comparing myself or I'm getting compared to others. And often you are not the best out there, since I'm generally not. If there's one thing I've learned of being a content creator, boy, you better be humble because they're gonna cut your ass down whenever they can. Some of the
here. Thick skin,
comments are
yeah.
just mean.
Thick skin and humility go a very long way in content creation.
They absolutely do. And can we define what imposter syndrome is before we get too deep into it? So we kind of have an understanding before we dive deep here.
Yeah, absolutely. So imposter syndrome is something that gets thrown around a whole lot nowadays, and it's kind of when people feel uncomfortable you hear it get thrown around when people feel uncomfortable about presenting stuff or that discomfort around doing it.
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome itself was really, oh man, it was first defined in the late 70s. I think it was 78. And what it really is, what it's really looked at, it's when people doubt their skills or they're fearful of being exposed as a fraud, despite all the evidence to the contrary, right? So it's this idea that you could spend years and decades mastering something and truly be really good at your craft, but anytime you show it off and you get a little bit of success from it, what happens is you don't believe that, or you stop showing it off because you think somebody's going to find a flaw in it and that's going to discount everything that you did. So when you do something good and somebody recognizes it, you say, it was luck of the draw. I got really lucky when I was printing this piece or when I was turning this bowl, right? Or, it all has to do with, the ambient temperature was really good. And so this stuck to the plate really well. And it's everything but the skill and the time and the effort that you put into it, right?
The only time that I ever get to say, it is because of my skill is when people question why the price is what it is. The price is what it is because I have 15 years experience myself, and then we have an entire team behind us and we have overhead. If you want to go work with someone who is doing it for bottom dollar, go to Etsy and do that. But, you don't want to wait 2 months? Well, okay. Now you understand. But it's not always that easy to convey on social media because there's this fine line between having confidence and being cocky. And that line is really blurry, especially depending on who you keep, right? What is your community that is around you look like? Are they people from Twitch? Are they people from YouTube? Are they just random friends of yours that you found on a Friday night maker call and all of a sudden you get to ask them to not, some of them work with you, some of them come on your podcast. It all depends. What does your market look like? Because if your market is like on LinkedIn, the market of people that I have on LinkedIn are like, these are people that are making metal parts for permanent internal use in the human body. They don't care.
Yeah.
They could not care less about, a perfect benchy or something like that. They want to see $1 million machines making $10 million parts, right? That's the kind of stuff that gets their juices flowing, or they want to see a cool story. And the cool stories for me are what always have enjoyed it for me. We have Matt Cat USA asking that they were going to ask, at what point does humility devolve into imposter syndrome?
So that's really interesting. And I think it's when you start to, when it starts to really impact what you're doing, whether that's livelihood or your functioning or something like that. Like humility is great. I could probably suffer from getting a little bit more of it from time to time in what I'm doing, right? And it's okay to be humble, right? When that humility goes to your doubting of your ability and not wanting to produce, whatever it is that you're producing. And we'll probably get to this a little bit later, but there are kind of 5 types of imposter syndrome, right? When you get to that point where you stop producing because whatever you believe you're doing isn't good enough anymore, that's not about humility. That's about something else that's going on, right? And you were starting to talk, you were talking, Grant, a little bit about kind of 2 ends of a spectrum a second ago. On this one end of the spectrum, you have imposter syndrome, which is you have achieved all of these great things. And it's due to time and effort and all these things that you put in, but you don't want to show any of that because you're worried that the slightest thing is going to be seen as a failure, the slightest imperfection called out in social media or whatever.
It is.
Yeah, right.
No, it just is.
Yeah, and you get so worried about that you don't produce anything anymore.
Yeah. Because
you're worried that you're going to be seen as a fraud despite everything that you do. The other end of that spectrum, or almost the other end of that spectrum, is what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And lots of people are probably familiar with this over, let's call it the last 2 years, or if you spend any time on social media, you see a lot of Dunning-Kruger. And Dunning-Kruger is it's a cognitive bias. It's this thought process that non-average people, whether you're on the high end of that or the low end of that, right, inaccurately estimate their own abilities. So you know nothing about a topic, yet you feel like you can go and talk about it for 45 minutes with somebody who has studied it for their entire life, right? Or you know so much about a topic, right? And you kind of don't believe that you do, so you stay away from that conversation. So Dunning-Kruger actually works on kind of both ends of that spectrum, but it's very much the almost the polar opposite of the imposter syndrome, because you'll have people. I would say if I were doing a training with people, I'd say show of hands, like who's had a conversation on Facebook with somebody. Great example of this. Oh, the Facebook. I'm gonna use the Facebook.
The 3D printing Facebook groups.
The 3D printing Facebook group, right?
Yeah. Well, let us know in those comments there. Let's see.
Right? Yeah. Just go ahead and share your stories in the comments. This will go on forever. But when somebody posts something on the 3D printing Facebook group, right, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know what this is." And somebody with years or decades of experience 3D printing puts some suggestions out there, right? A well-known name kind of in the community. And then 300 people who got their first printer at Christmas time and have never done anything are like, no, that's not it. This is definitely, this is definitely what's going on. I know this. I've been printing for 6 months. And you're like, okay, not that 6 months isn't a time that you could build some mastery, right? I don't want to put anybody down for that. But when you have very little experience, but talk about it from the stance of an expert. Yeah. That's what we're talking about with that Dunning-Kruger effect.
I have been banned from 2 resin Facebook groups because that I say resin is toxic. Let me be clear. Resin is toxic. Read the MSDS. And they've literally banned me saying, you're wrong. And I reply back with the MSDS, and then they really ban me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
At that point, burn it to the ground, right? That's mutually assured destruction. You want to get rid of me? I'll throw it in your face that you're wrong. Yeah, the Facebook groups are it's that sounding board too, especially on Facebook, right? As midterms, if you're watching it live, midterms are happening in a couple of days here in the States. Make sure you get your ass out and vote. And if you are listening audio only, which comes out a week after we do it live on YouTube, 1, you should come be hanging out with us live on YouTube. But 2, I hope you went out and voted. Because if you didn't go vote, you can't complain.
Well, you can, just ain't nobody going to want to hear it. I mean, let's be honest.
That's fair.
You can complain, but you didn't do anything to be part of the solution.
But the sounding boards, man, and every now and then someone that doesn't have all that information will get it right, and then they're like, I am a 3D printing god.
Yeah.
You're not. Calm down a little bit, but you did get something right, and let's talk about that. That is very complicated to do. It's why we started Print Fix Friday. It wasn't because I really know what I'm doing. In fact, a lot of the episodes I ask for audience input. I do it because I want to maintain humility. Although every now and then I do have meme episodes where we just make fun of people. But I want to maintain that humility. I want to maintain looking at sometimes the same stuff week after week, but and understand what goes wrong. Because if you only say, well, I don't have first layer problems anymore, I have a Prusa that just works. Well, then when someone brings you a first layer problem, you're going to start asking about extrusion multiplier and not what does your first layer look like.
Oh,
And
see, that's where you're off, because I start with did you use the right Aquanet on the glass plate? Right, because that's where you get some first layer. That's right, old school.
When we had the retail business, we would always get the middle-aged women that would walk in and be like, "It smells very familiar in here. What is going on?" And I'm laughing because I already know what the answer is, and I'm like, just look around, see if there's anything that you recognize. And they see the bottle of Aquanet, and they both, it was always two of them. It was never on their own. It was always two ladies that would walk in together, and oh my gosh, I remember the big hair days from the 80s. Oh, can we spray a little? I'm like, go ahead, I don't care. They were reliving the good old days.
The scent of it just connects to the memory portion of their processing. And just go, I have God, Lauren and I have been together 12 years. I don't think she's ever seen me with hair. I've been shaving my head that long. And one of my favorite 3D printing stories was during the beginnings of the human malware issue that we had. We were using all printers on deck to do whatever we could for donation. And so Prusas are running, and we got the FlashForge Creator Pro going again. And that it's always been a piece of glass, tied down with the clips,
yep.
The paper clip, not paper clips, but
yeah.
And so, went into the local grocery store and bought like 4 cans of Aquanet with the shaved head. And the girl at the register was like, maybe I just don't understand. I was like, nothing to understand here. It stays in place. I need a lot for this. I had a nice little laugh out of it. She was very, very confused in the situation, but
the same thing when we would be running the full color printer and I would need new brushes, I would go to the makeup stores and I said, I need your softest brush as a guy. And I didn't have long hair back then. I've only been growing my hair out since having the YouTube channel. We are going to shave that eventually. So at some point I might look like you, Nick. That might be fun. We're going to do that for charity. So when that happens, y'all better get your wallets open. It's going to go to the Sanjay Mortimer Foundation. But
nice.
They used to just ask me what it was for. And I said, I can tell you the reason that it's for, but it is not going to help me find a better brush. I am looking for the softest brush that you have. Eventually, I just started telling them it was for drag, because at that point, they stopped asking questions. I didn't have to explain that it was for full color sandstone 3D printing, and it needed to be dealing with gypsum powder. It was just easier to tell them that it was for drag, because it solved all the problems instantly with no questions whatsoever.
See, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. But when that was imposter syndrome at its finest for me, right? I always, our clients range from the Smithsonian to Snoop Dogg, right? Everything in between. And we were voted best in the world 5 years in a row for full color 3D printing. Like, I know what I'm doing.
Yep.
And I'm considered one of the experts in it. But God, I hate talking about it because I always feel like I'm going to get something wrong. And yet, every now and then, I will get a direct message on Reddit because someone has been searching for full color sandstone and my name always comes up for it. So I get direct messages of, hey, can you help me with this problem? I'm like, oh yeah, it's this, this, and this. They're like, wow, you really are good. I'm like, yeah, well, why don't you talk about it anymore? Because I don't like to. The machines fail all the time for no valid reason. And, when people say, oh, my $200 Ender won't do that, why does your $90,000 printer do that? Because it was designed at MIT in the early 2000s and has not been changed since. That's why.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They spend a little bit of money developing that. But what you're talking about is one of those kind of those 5 types of imposter syndrome, right? And I want to make sure that I give credit where credit is due here. Dr. Valerie Young wrote a book called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of it. And this is where she kind of lists the 5 types. And the type that you're just talking about, or you were just talking about, is kind of the expert type of imposter syndrome. And it's this idea that you want to know everything on a topic, and you spend time pursuing that knowledge, and you get to know everything about, not everything, but you get a significant knowledge base around that topic. And then when you go to help somebody or you're going to do something, if they ask a question that you don't have an answer to, you feel like a failure because you don't know absolutely everything about that. And that pulls you away from that kind of sense of mastery that you've already got around something, right? And so it's really dangerous because you do know a lot. You know so much, but you don't know everything. You're going to get hit with a question where you're like, oh, God, I don't know that, right? And there are 2 ways to go about that. I saw in the chat a little bit earlier, somebody noted it's okay to not know everything, right? And I fully agree with that. If you are built of that mindset, right? If that's kind of your personality, where you're able to say, oh, I don't know everything, but I know where I can go to check this out. I can find this resource. I can do this. I can do that, whatever, right? Then you're probably going to bounce back from that, and you're not going to have to worry so much about that imposter syndrome.
Right.
If you're of the mindset that, no, I needed to know all of this, there's a potential of starting to go down a rabbit hole you don't want to go down, right? Which is going to lead to that, I'm not that expert. I am a fraud because somebody asked a question that I didn't know an answer to.
And let's look at turning, as Pooch says, your hobby into your jobby, right? Where you go from an amateur
Speaking
maker,
of humility,
yeah,
Pooch.
Pooch, amazing, right? But you know, that jump of, I'm just doing this for fun, and you know, maybe I'll make a couple of bucks on Etsy, whatever it is, to this is now my full-time job, and I am expected to be an expert. And the general consensus is fake it till you make it. But boy, you better know how to read that room, because if there is someone in there that really knows what they're doing, you better have that humility. How is it best to kind of deal with that and understand that, yeah, okay, there is some faking involved, but how do you, because nobody wants to hire an amateur. They want to hire an expert. And yes, over years or months or whatever it might be, if you're really dedicated, you could become an expert in 3D printing in certain technologies in 6 to 8 months, if that is all that you live, breathe, and all that. But like, how are we supposed to be dealing with this? Because, damn, in the early days, it was tough. It's still tough now, but no one asks for credentials anymore. They just kind of, everyone assumes I'm an engineer, so I don't. Unless they
some point
ask,
it becomes true, right?
well, unless they ask, well, where'd you get your engineering degree? I said, what? I was just say one engineering degree. Wait, you're not an engineer? No, it's even on the website that I have 2 business degrees.
Look, it blows people away when there are conversations, whether it's IRF or MRF or a Maker Faire or wherever we happen to be at, when you know, I'm talking about what I'm doing, or Lauren, more specifically, Lauren talking about what she's doing, because she's amazing. This is my humility. She is amazing at what she does and the design and everything. And I wish I had like half a gram of that talent.
Me too.
You know, so, you know, when getting asked about those kind of things, it's very much like, oh, well, you know, where'd you study engineering? And, you know, I make a comment that I went to Drexel. For those who don't know, Drexel is a huge engineering school. That's what Drexel produces. I am by far the minority coming out of Drexel with a psychology degree. Well, back then, now doctors, lawyers, they've bought a bunch of different schools, combined things, whatever.
Right.
Glad my tuition helped pay for some of that, I think. But having that conversation with folk, and then they're like, oh, so what do you do during the day? Expecting like computer programming, engineering, something that's in the tech field. And I'm like, oh, I'm a therapist. And they're like, well, wait a second. What? And it's like, yeah, this is a hobby. Like I enjoy this. I enjoy what I'm doing. But to that question, like the fake it till you make it, and what you do about that is it's part of that honest conversation with yourself and knowing where you're really at, right? If I 3D print 3 benchies and one of the gnomes from, printed solid and, a couple other little things, God, way back when, what, the baby Groots, or
Oh
even now, if
God,
I get,
Nick, you've been in this for a long time.
I've been in this for a minute.
Damn
I've been
baby
in this for a
Groots.
minute. Yeah. You print 1 or 2 of those and you get really good with it. Like, okay, that's great. Recognize where you're at with that. You're still a novice. You're still building what you're doing, right?
And that's okay.
And that's fine.
That's okay.
That's absolutely fine. That's part of, and that's not where imposter syndrome comes in, because if you fail at something in that regard, you're just starting to build a skill set. You're starting to build a mastery. So failing and having somebody call you out on it doesn't necessarily equate to imposter syndrome in that way. Now, you do this for years, and I'm looking at the chat and I just saw failure is a great teacher. I absolutely agree.
It is. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can ruin your business.
Depending on the context. Yes.
Yeah.
But the difference is you start doing this for decades and you start creating your own slicer profiles, and you're really kind of, even that you can kind of learn, but you really start digging into that, right? And you start getting everything tuned perfectly, and you're doing it all in that regard. And then you present it out to the world on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, wherever you happen to present it. And it is flawless. And you get 10,000 likes and 2,500 comments that are all like, oh my God, this is amazing, da 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 da. And one person goes, oh no, I think I see a little stringing right here, and does the 100 times zoom in to the tiniest thing that the human eye would never pick up. Exactly, right? We're super troopers. Enhance over and over again, right? And that one person makes a comment, and you all of a sudden go, I'm a fraud.
And that is literally the one thing you're going to remember. You're not going to remember the 40 or 50 amazing comments. I'm going to remember when people that I respected say, God, do you ever wash your hair? It always looks oily. I said, well, my hair does produce enough oil that I'm surprised it hasn't been invaded by the United States, but I do wash it every other day. It's long hair. I'm not washing it every day, damn it. But
should somebody from the NSA be watching, I'm pretty sure Grant has weapons of mass destruction right behind his ears. That should trigger an invasion.
I mean, I live in Florida. You really, it could be either of those things.
That's a good point.
But it is. It's like, I remember those comments vividly. I remember the personal attacks and there's a difference between someone saying this print sucks, why don't you try this, to wow, your printing is terrible, you should get off of YouTube. And then I go to their channel, they have no videos, they've had their account for 3 years, and who are you again?
Yeah. And that's, look, that you want to do a whole nother, never mind episode, but you want to do a whole nother series on what happens on the internet and the psychology behind that. I mean, I'm pretty sure not only could we turn this into a podcast series, it could probably be a book, like speaking engagements. Oprah's not on anymore. We could do the Oprah circuit for a while. I mean, we've got some talking points there.
But is it you get a Prusa, everybody?
That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it's going to be, right? It's exactly what it's going to be.
Dude, and the whole going the next step of writing a book, or as a content creator, we're looking at making merch. I'm like, am I really at this point in my life where I've decided that people want to pay money to wear my logo? And then I'm like, wait a minute. How do I have people, how do I have the general public differentiate staff members from fans? Because I was gonna produce and sell polos, the same ones that I wear. I'm like, oh, that could be bad. So we're just gonna only do t-shirts. Although Russ specifically, he's gonna get a polo. Russ is a good guy.
We'll chat about this, because we do the same thing whenever we put on Earth every year. 2 years we put staff on the back of it. It was great. And then we just realized don't bother putting staff around it. And this year I was like, I'm just going to differentiate myself with a walkie-talkie, and people picked it out and we were good to go.
I mean, you did look like you were in the Secret Service minus the suit.
I was prepped. I
Yeah.
was prepped. I did think about next year, maybe ERF 2023, a suit, just the whole, all the sponsors on the back of the jacket. We'll go with it
Oh, that
that
would
way.
be so hot.
It would, oh my God. Too much movement for that. Too much movement.
And those that don't know, you are one of the organizers of the East Coast
Yes.
Rep Festival. So
Yes.
if you did go to ERF or you enjoyed our ERF content, you should be thanking Nick, because if it wasn't for Nick and previously Lauren, she's stepping
Chris
down.
and Vicky
Chris and Vicky.
and Lauren, who is stepping down but may stay on as a consultant. We're still having conversations. We're still.
She's pulling a Tom Brady.
She may. We're not quite at the 40-day mark yet, but I think when we get to the 40-day mark, she might come back.
Got it. Yeah, if you enjoyed our content or any of the other content that came out, or you were there in person, make sure to thank the organizers, because you guys that is the thankless job, right?
Look, this is where I'm going to go with a little bit of the humility. It is absolutely the four of us, and we all do our part throughout the year, and things look different. You know, when ERF is here, I'm running around, I'm doing all kinds of stuff.
Literally, Matt was making you run a lot.
Yeah, he and I have had conversations about that. I mean, it's good for me, and that's how I spun it. He was looking out for my health, and so I appreciate that. You know, I think I got 10,000 steps in just during his talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to give a lot of credit to the rest of the board members, because they do so much, and the arena makes it really easy for us to run the event. They do a phenomenal job setting it up. So huge shout out to the folk at Aberdeen Proving Grounds Federal Credit Union Arena. Yeah.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored. Not sponsored.
And so can we go over the 5 different types of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about that expert version, right? Where you spend all this time, all this energy becoming an expert, and then you don't really do anything with it because you feel like you're going to be a fraud if you get called out, or you do get called out, and then you kind of back away from that whole situation. A really common one is kind of the perfectionist. Oh, yeah. Which is this idea that I hone my craft so well that everything is flawless. And I've talked about this example like a couple of times. And then somebody finds even the slightest flaw or gives the minor suggestion about it. And all of a sudden your confidence in yourself and your ability is shot, right? And you think, I'm a fraud. I've been found out because of that. Mm-hmm. There's a third version is called the natural genius, which is somebody who picks things up or has historically picked things up so easy in their life, everything just kind of comes to them, right? You introduce them to a new skill or hobby, and within 3-4 weeks, they are moving from, and there was a question in the chat, how do you know you've gone from a novice to a professional? And somebody answered, you're making money on it, which I think is definitely part of it.
That is the technical answer.
That is a technical answer.
When do you become a professional? When you are paid to do something, right?
Right.
So technically, I am a professional dancer. I have taken
this is not this. I feel like we're going away from family friendly here.
No, swing dancing. And if you watched the Printed Solid episode, you will see some of that. That was the first time I did the better part of a full song since my back injury, which is we didn't put that in the video, but it was just one of those. They were playing swing music, so we had to do it.
So you got to go for it, right?
Yeah, you just had to go for it. But yeah, I've always considered that, right? It's when you accept money for it and you look at your time and say, this was worth it.
Yeah.
Right.
See, I'm not to go too far off topic, but I'm a big believer of people always transition between different levels. So if you think about kind of like 3 levels of mastery, the first level of mastery is kind of like this general knowledge base that you build, right? And then most people move pretty quickly from general knowledge base to kind of more advanced, right? So if we use this in like 3D printing, that general knowledge base is, I can turn my printer on, I can slice an STL, right? I can put it on my printer and I can hit print with a Prusa, right? And it prints and it comes out, and that's fantastic, right? Then you move to kind of this next level, which is kind of this ongoing knowledge base level, right? Where you're continuing to learn, you're picking up different things. And when you're at this ongoing knowledge base level, you're trying different things. And this isn't where imposter syndrome is going to kick in. This is I'm still learning, I'm still feeling comfortable. So I create my first slicer profile and it doesn't work. at all, right? It is stringy and it's over extruding and everything looks horrible. And you're like, okay, well, I got to go back and I got to tune it. And so you tune it and you keep going and you get it right. And then you create another, and da 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 for different filaments, different machines, all of this stuff, right? I think then you feel so comfortable with that, you move into this like third level of mastery, which is kind of that expertise status, where people are coming to you for questions and you can answer fairly consistently and fairly on point. It's built on experience, it's built on knowledge base, you know, all of these different things. But what I think happens is people bounce between those two levels of ongoing knowledge and expertise. And it happens fairly consistently, and it happens because technology changes around things. Mm-hmm. So for an FDM printer, you may be at that expert kind of level around things, and lo and behold, you buy a resin machine. Yeah. And you quickly get through because enough can transition, but you quickly move through
at that point.
Yeah, you quickly move through that beginner stage and you move into the ongoing stage, right? And so I think there's always this level of bouncing back and forth in that place of expertise, because you learn something new. God, if you want to stay in the realm of FDM, right, you get a tool changer. And you're like, oh, this is completely different than what I knew before. Yep. Let me look at how I'm going to work on that, right? So I think there are those three levels of expertise. And to say, you know, I've moved from novice to expert or novice to professional, yeah, I think you can use a technical definition. When somebody starts paying you for your work, right, and they keep paying you for your work.
Yeah, returning customers are always good.
Right. That's always a positive thing, right?
If your grandma paid you $20 for one of your 3D prints, I don't technically, I mean, by the definition of professional, that would qualify, but
exactly.
Maybe not.
That's what I was just thinking. My mom says I'm the most handsome boy ever, and she gives me $50 for my first Benchy. Like, great, I'm a professional. I printed a Benchy. You know, at some point you have that internal as well. Like, okay, thanks, Mom, love you, but you know, I also know that's not the case.
We have a testimonial page on our website, and the cheeky bastard in me has always wanted to put best 3D printing service on the world. My dad. Right? Because it's the same way that when you go to our website and you look at the About Us page, the cat is the director of marketing and director of HR. There is a picture of Victoria with a bio, and it says she's the director of marketing and director of HR. Why? Because that's just who we are. And if you find that unprofessional and you don't want to work with us, well, you probably weren't a good fit for us anyways.
Right. Again, know your audience, know who you're talking to. Right. So you have going back to it, you have that natural genius who picks things up really, really easily. Everything you can imagine that you've handed to them, they pick up quickly. And they're like, okay, I get this. Right. And then they hit something that they can't master in that short period of time. And that makes them feel like a fraud. Like everything they have done before doesn't matter at this point. Right. So you can see all of this is very cognitive. It's very tied into our thought process about ourselves, our belief in ourselves, tied to self-confidence, self-worth, all of that, right? Fourth type that we haven't talked about is kind of the what was labeled by Dr. Young as the rugged individualist, the person who believes they can do everything themselves, they don't need assistance, they're good to go.
They'll find out that's wrong when they get big.
Pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
But that's where the imposter syndrome comes in, because when they can't do something by themselves, when they have to ask for that help or that assistance, they're not willing to accept it. They see it as a fault within them. And now all of a sudden, I'm not as good as I used to, and people see that, and so I can't be what I was.
That one feels like a phase for a lot of business owners, though, right? You because you're used to doing everything yourself. And then you get bigger, and then all of a sudden you're working 18 to 20 hours a day. You're still missing deadlines. You're not getting stuff out. But you're like, I can do this if I just work harder, if I just do this. I tell myself this often, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm also looking at who I was 2.5 years ago before my back injury. And there are a lot of things that I could do back then that I can't really do now. Like mowing my grass and being a functional human the next day are mutually exclusive now. It is, I have 2 acres of land and a riding lawnmower. It is not flat. There's a lot of bumps and stuff, and that hurts my back, and it makes me basically lose a day. But that is what it is, right? That's my new normal, and I have to look at, okay, can I clear a Monday or can I clear a Sunday and be able to mow and have that day off to rest and recover? But it does make you feel kind of like a failure. Not that it's my fault, right? My injury was not my
Right.
fault. It was a work-related injury, not due to 3D Musketeers. But that is, but you kind of grow out of it eventually. Or, I mean, if you
Or
don't,
you
you'll
don't.
fail.
Exactly.
If you
And
don't, you'll
that's the
fail.
problem.
Literally, right?
Yep.
Or you'll die. That's the get rich or
Well,
die trying, right?
yeah, and that leads to your fifth type, which is the superhero type of imposter syndrome, which is the I can do it all. I should be able to do everything, right? And
Mhm.
you're starting to talk about that, right? Despite limitations, I should be able to do this, 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 and this. And if I can't do those things, I'm an abject failure, right? And so why even bother? Right? People have found out that I'm a fraud because I can't do all of those things that I believe in myself I should be able to do. Right? So not recognizing your own limitations. So those five types are really what kind of center the different types of imposter syndrome that we typically see.
Ooh, Mad Cat's got a good one.
Oh, what's that?
What do you do though when you have an employer who keeps piling more and more work on you and expecting you to keep performing to the same standards before? Me, it's update your resume and find a new job. But because they clearly don't value you. But I know, Grant, easier said than done, says the guy that clearly didn't do a great job working for others. And you know what? I tried it and it literally broke my back. So I'm going to go back to doing what hasn't broken my back historically, working for myself.
Well,
But
so Mad Cat brings up a really good point though, and this is the difference between like imposter syndrome and other
that's just a shitty boss, I think.
other. Well, yeah, I mean, look, I'm not necessarily gonna go that way, but not wrong, but I'm not going down that road, right? So imposter syndrome is that belief that you can't do it, right? It's not somebody else telling you that you can't do it or that you haven't been able to do it. For like, oh, if we have Harry Potter fans who are around, right? Think about like Hermione being at Hogwarts, right? Smartest girl in that probably smartest person in that series, short of maybe Dumbledore, right? But constantly being told by Malfoy that she shouldn't be there because she's a mudblood, that she's not pure blood, right? That's somebody else telling her she can't do it. That's not imposter syndrome. Now, if Hermione was like, "Oh, I can't do this one thing because I've done it 300 times, but I just don't believe in myself," that's a different story.
Well, and I don't know if this qualifies as imposter syndrome, but it's this: if you hear it enough, it becomes true. And even if you have other people tell you the same thing over and over again, it effectively becomes reality because you can't get away from it. Does that qualify as imposter syndrome, or is that just still you have shitty friends?
No, that wouldn't qualify as imposter syndrome unless because somebody else is the one that's telling you that over and over again. You're hearing it from somebody else. It's not necessarily that belief in yourself, right? And now it may become that belief in yourself if you hear it over and over and over again, right? But if you're and if you're hearing it over and over again, but your work belies that fact. So if your work is still outstanding and impeccable and everybody else sees it that way, but one person keeps telling you over and over you don't belong, and you believe that one person, and then you stop producing your work because of that belief system, now you might be into that realm of imposter syndrome.
So how, and this is always the tough one, right? Because I paint with my broad brush here, but I believe that most makers have some form of ADHD. It is pretty much a prerequisite for becoming a maker. But how are you able to, I guess, see imposter syndrome before it gets back? ADHD is a pretty easy one to figure out, right? How many projects do you have that you said you would finish and haven't touched for 6 months? Maybe you might want to go look and get tested.
I was going to say, I really hope that's a rhetorical question because that
No,
number
it
is a
is
high
absolutely.
number. Like
I'm not answering that question either. I'm going to plead the fifth, Your Honor. But, it might be good to go get tested. Now, you don't have to medicate if that's something you don't want to do, but at least
Absolutely.
understanding, right? That is something that is easily trackable. Imposter syndrome, on the other hand, you have to have that certain level of mental well-being and mental wellness, is how I've been told from therapists before that's what it's called. You have to like be able to step away from your life and look at yourself in the third person and say, all right, Grant, what the hell are you actually doing here? Is this imposter syndrome, or are you really just bad at this. And the answer might be you're just bad at this. Like silicone work, I'm just bad at it. It is because humidity in Florida, but I'm just bad at it. Imposter syndrome is I suck at 3D printing. Now, to be clear, Prusa Slicer and Prusa printers make it a lot easier to be good at 3D printing without like I'm like this is easy mode. And nobody realizes this is it. And anytime someone says, well, you just don't know what you're doing, I said, okay, why don't you go ahead and build your own custom slicer profile in Repetier Host without using anything else? And yes, you will have to study.
Not against it.
Yeah, you will have to study in no G code because I've done that. And it's not fun. Why don't you compile your own version of Marlin? Go ahead, try it. Most people can't do it. But is that skill really needed these days? Well, no, it's not.
Right. And so you bring up a great question, because recognition of imposter syndrome, right, takes that higher level, like intuitive look at yourself and what's really going on, right? It also requires kind of that, taking on the aspect of others. And when others are like, no, what you're doing is amazing, right? Keep going with it. Hearing that and kind of internalizing that, right? And so the recommendations you'll get around things like how to deal with imposter syndrome are like, recognize your mastery in things. And it's super easy. As a therapist, it's super easy to say those type of things, right? To know it's those things have rolled off of my tongue in sessions far more times than, this idea of, so it's really easy to say, recognize that you're good at things. Mm-hmm. The trick in all of therapy is moving somebody from that statement of recognizing you're good at something to that belief system that they are good at that, right? Because now you're starting to change cognitions. You're starting to change what people hold on to. And so there are a lot of things that have been done, researched as being effective for working with or kind of combating imposter syndrome. Some of the early work was on group work, pulling people together and having them talk about their experience actually got people to recognize. I know, I see the face.
I don't like I don't mind talking to a professional.
Peopling is hard.
Right? Well, no, it's this whole vulnerability thing. Like, obviously being a content creator means I have to be more vulnerable, because if I'm not, I come off as an arrogant ass, and my channel has more than 3 letters in it. And I'm not pulling out the tinfoil for a video, not yet at least. Although there might be a video in the works and involves tinfoil. Anyways, I don't like group work, because if I'm gonna be vulnerable, I want to be vulnerable with somebody that I can trust, like quite literally, legally trust. I don't trust any of those other pieces of shit that are in the room. Right? Because we're all here because we're all broken. And, there are certain times it might work. I am just not the type of person that works, because it makes me so uncomfortable. I just won't talk. And I know people are like, wait, he won't talk? He never shuts up. You're right, I won't talk. So maybe that's the trick. You want me to shut up, put me in a room of other people where they're all talking about the problems in their life.
Fair. So group work, it was one thing that was viewed very early on. Mm-hmm. And so it does work. It's shown success if that works for you. But it's like anything else in kind of the world of mental health or therapy. It has to be what works for the individual. Yeah. So you can't just prescribe something and say this is going to work for everybody. Like I have plenty of colleagues who are amazing therapists who I know just don't connect with certain types of people, and they know don't connect with certain types of people and certain types of things that are going on, and will perfectly reasonably stay clear of those kind of situations, right? So, knowing a little bit about yourself, kind of what works for you, group dynamics versus individual dynamics, that's all, hugely important. So while the group work did do really well, individual work can work around it as well. And now you start to move into the realm of like doing cognitive behavioral therapy, seeing how your cognitions are impacting everything that's going on around you, right? And for those who haven't had therapy or are unfamiliar with CBT, there's this great diagram about how your cognitions impact your thinking, how your thinking impacts your behavior. And those arrows are all multifaceted. They all bi-directional. So your behavior attaches to your thinking, just like your thinking attaches to your behavior attaches to your feelings, yada, yada, yada. I could draw it out, but it'd be horrible. And we really don't need me drawing on anything right now. So CBT work to really work on some of those cognitions of self-worth and some of those cognitions of mastery, self-confidence, challenging that unhelpful or inaccurate belief system that somebody has is also shown to be effective. But they've also found that finding mentors, and talking to peers one-on-one or in a group setting who have similar types of experiences and can provide constructive feedback has done a lot to move people out of this realm of imposter syndrome. So if you sit there and talk with somebody who's been doing 3D printing for as long or longer than you have and has mastery in it, and they provide constructive criticism around what's going on, as well as that praise for the things that are going well.
It's the freaking best.
Then you start to realize, you're like, okay, it doesn't have to be, that in itself starts to change the dynamics of what's going on in your head, because you're hearing from somebody else with that experience that maybe you value as a mentor or as a role model.
They become qualified.
Right. Right. So
I get that once you can get into therapy, right? CBT, DBT as well, dialectical behavioral therapy.
Dialectical behavior. Yep.
Those are both amazing. I am the firm believer that every person at some point in their life should at least try one of those two, if not both. It is amazing, and it will help you better understand the way that certain things mess with you. Because when you understand that, you can predict precisely what your emotions and what your reactions to things will be, and you can plan accordingly, which allows you to be a stronger person and utilize your emotions to your benefit. A lot of us with ADHD, we recognize that a slight amount of stress helps us fire on all cylinders. Okay, well, if you know precisely what can stress you out to that very little limit to make you be more efficient with your life, and you can artificially put yourself under that kind of stress, you, my friend, have found nitrous oxide for humans. Non-medicated nitrous oxide, of course. And that then becomes you can weaponize it more or less for your good, rather than have your lack of understanding be bad. But for so many years, and still to this day, it is, I don't know, I'm blanking on the right term, but it is, some people look at therapy as you must be insane that you're seeking a psychologist, or even further, a psychiatrist, someone that can prescribe medications. Yep. And if you grew up with that, or you are surrounded by people that have that thought process, you might not necessarily decide that reaching out is your right option. So how are you able to move past that negative stigma and move into a situation where, okay, I actually do need some help. I'm not crazy. I'm just human.
Yeah, look, that's, if I had an answer for that, I think mental health would be booming in this country, right? Because there is very much that stigma of there's something wrong with me, and that's why I need to go see a therapist, versus look, it's somebody to talk to about what's going on, and things that might be a little bit too much for me to carry at the moment. I've had this conversation with family members, many family members, close friends, many times, right? One of the things that I have recognized, and I think most people know that, you probably know this, I imagine people in the chat, people who might listen to this, right? If somebody tells you got to go to therapy, guess what you're not doing?
You're not going to therapy.
You're not going to therapy, right?
What do you know about me? You don't know shit about my life. I don't need therapy. You need therapy. Yeah.
Exactly. You tell somebody they got to do something, they ain't doing it. That's pretty much a given.
Whenever I recommend it, I will provide personal experiences, and I will provide personal recommendations. And I find that that tends to break that barrier. Like, hey, I used to see this person. It wasn't a great fit for me because of this, and this. However, I believe they might be a good fit for you because they were a great fit for me in the beginning. Now that I'm at a certain extra new level or whatever it is, or I'm going deeper into certain things, they're not the best. But if you're just starting out, they're amazing, right? those that know me beyond the YouTube channel, that know me personally, know that I am a massive, massive proponent of mental health. I want people to go get help. As someone that doesn't get help as often as they probably should, until it's too damn late, and then I'm like, I should probably be seeing a therapist again. Okay, I guess we'll get this scheduled. And then I spend the next 2 weeks diving deep into these people and figuring out which ones I like. It's definitely not an ADHD problem. Definitely not an ADHD problem.
So here's the thing for those watching, those in chat, those listening in the future. There has been plenty of research that has talked about one of the most important aspects of therapy is the connection that you have to your therapist.
Yes.
If you don't feel connected to your therapist, do not feel obligated to stay because you started with one person, right? It is completely okay to tell your therapist, this isn't working for me. I think I need to see somebody else, right? A good therapist is going to recognize that. We all know there is not a one size fits all therapist for everybody, right?
A good therapist might recognize it before you do.
They may, and be able to tell you openly, like, look, I very much respect what you're going through. I have somebody else that you might want to see who's better in this particular area, and I think that you're going to connect with better than myself.
Yep.
Right. So spend the time. Your first therapist probably isn't going to be your only therapist. Now, if it is, great, congratulations. You did a phenomenal job, or you got really lucky. Either way, I'm happy for you. But if it's not, it's okay to say this isn't working for me and I need to do something else. Your therapist, if they're a good therapist, is not going to take it personally. We recognize these things. We get it, right?
I recently found a cheat code to therapy. Sorry, I didn't.
Really? No, go for it. At AB, what is it? Up, down, left, right, BA, BA, select, start. Also, 33 therapists on call.
Kind of. It's called OpenPath. And OpenPath has made therapy affordable for me. A lot of the therapists that I've connected with, I can't necessarily afford. Right. I am not currently working with her, so I don't mind giving her a shout out. Her name is Robin Debates. You can find her on OpenPath. She'll be easy to find because she has a picture of her dog and her as her main profile photo. And then I went to her profile and she specializes in geeks. And yep, 100% does. And even further, was not certified to do work in Florida, and over the course of a weekend obtained the certification to do work in Florida, which is a little scary of how fast that's possible, but I'm not questioning it. I will absolutely recommend her up and down the field. She was not a particular good fit for me because of some extenuating circumstances, but I highly recommend her because she's literally we got on a Zoom call, and this is my desk. She's like, yep. Oh, you're a perfect fit for this. She saw the background. She's like, are those Prussias? I'm like, yeah. Yep. And I'm like, all right. See, because then I don't have to describe I just can't get the prints to stick to my bed. They're like, why are you trying to stick 3D prints to your bed? That's where you sleep. Stop that. That's not healthy. I've had to explain that to my fair few. And it is really getting that connection, right? Yep. But OpenPath brought rates from like $120 an hour down to an average of 50 or less without insurance. Yeah. And that is really affordable.
Well, and here's the thing. We, as part of the code of ethics for counselors, so the ACA and even the APA, in the code of ethics is that our cost for therapy, some of it should be done pro bono. So you will find lots of therapists who will do sliding scale work. Yep. You will find therapists who will do some pro bono work because it's in the best interest of the community, of the individual, everything that's going on. But I'm going to put this out there, like everything else, don't, for those in the 3D printing community, right? Don't just go asking for the STL all the time. Realize that somebody put some work into it. So a therapist cannot always do pro bono work or cannot always move costs down for things. I'm going to take a step back for a second because you were talking about printing carrying to the bed. And I saw somebody in the chat a minute ago said, how do you get prints off of glass? And there were a number of suggestions. The way that I've always done it is if the glass bed fits in the freezer, put it in the
Freezer.
freezer, the
Yep.
print's going to pop right off after.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. See, you're getting tips on therapy and 3D printing. Did you think that was going to be an episode of the podcast? No. Well, damn it, that's what you get here.
I'm watching the chat, and I'm not. I apologize for not commenting on the chat. If I try to focus on too
They're
many things,
ADHD as bad
one
as
of
we
them's gonna
are.
right. One of them is going down a different path. But I'm seeing lots of people talking about their mental health and what they've done around their mental health. And kudos, my applause for taking care of yourselves and doing the things that you need to do. And I'm seeing lots of positives that are being noted there, and I absolutely love that. I am happy that you took the step, because it's not always easy. It's challenging to be able to say, I need to do something about this, and then to almost go and trust a complete stranger with everything that's going on with you.
Well, so. I mean, here's a good one. And Duff is, he's in here a lot, so I don't mind using his name here, but it says, part of my fears regarding seeking professional help in Canada and having a license for certain things is having that pop up on some automated database lookup and losing that certain license. Yeah. Again, I don't know the laws or anything like that in Canada, but at least in the States, as long as you pay with cash, you don't got to use your real name if you don't want to. And if you say, look, I prefer to remain anonymous, they don't care. I've never, anytime when I first meet with someone, at least back before I was much more comfortable with myself, I would either use a fake name or I would say, I'm going to pay cash and I don't want you to ask my name. I want to talk to you, and that's it. That's as far as I want our relationship to go. And I realized that is a very bad way, because I've started saying, I just don't trust you, so I don't want to talk to you. But if that's what you need to get in that right direction, it's an option. It's not a great one, but it's an option.
Yeah,
and the Canadian healthcare system is a little different.
Yeah, and I unfortunately can't comment too much on the Canadian healthcare system. I have worked with folk in Toronto and teams in Toronto before, and a little bit about that, but kind of on a different scale. And I'd imagine I'm seeing the comment, yeah, we don't have 2A here, and I thought that was probably what that was attached to. I don't know enough about Canadian healthcare to even pretend that what I would say would make sense here. But what I can say is, here in the US, HIPAA laws very much connect to therapy and what's going on there, and releases would have to be signed around disclosure of information for certain things. Now, if you do purchase a firearm, the question is on there, have you ever been, I believe, convicted or diagnosed with something that would preclude you from owning a firearm?
It would be, it's 4473 for those that don't know, and is put on by the Department of Law Enforcement. And it will ask you if you ever have been committed to a mental institution, involuntary or otherwise. And if you have, and you get denied, so you would get denied if you have. If it has been 7 years, at least here in Florida, you are able to file for a petition to say, look, I'm cool. Like, that was just a one-time lapse of judgment, if you will. And after 7 years, that goes away, and you are then able to go the 2A route should you want to. But as with any, working with a therapist, don't say stupid shit, and understand what I'm trying to tell you. If generally speaking, if you say something that involves, physical harm to yourself or others, they do have to tell people. Yep. That is the legal requirement.
Yeah. So there are 3 legal requirements where therapists or mental health practitioners can break confidentiality. Yep. A threat to yourself or others, threat of elder abuse. Those are pretty clear that's what's going to happen. Like, somebody's going to say something, and that all comes from, not to go too deep into the history of mental health, but that all comes from a case called Tarasoff in California, where a partner threatened to injure his significant other, I believe it was his significant other, in a therapy session, and the therapist never reported it, and the partner did in fact create harm on his partner, and so that all ended up going to court, and now there is a duty to warn, I believe, in every state in the country.
Yep.
So that's why we have to report that.
Even in Florida, there is a duty to warn. And if it is, if one exists in Florida, I would have a feeling it's pretty much consistent throughout the states.
Yeah.
And Zombie's saying something here that is just, it hurts my soul, because this is the American way. He says, wait, affordable therapy in the US? I don't even want to talk about how expensive it was just be diagnosed and treated for ADHD. Yeah, I found a place that would accept cash. And I would call, because I had never been tested. My parents, to their credit, did not want to get me tested because they didn't want me to use it as a crutch. A lot of people will use that disability as a crutch and as an excuse for when they do dumb shit. No, you're just being an asshole. It's not because you have autism. It's not because you have ADHD. No, you're just being an asshole. There's a big difference between the two. And they recognize it. Let's not give them the crutch if they don't need it. Well, later on in my life, I got tested. And yeah, textbook, baby. Textbook ADHD. But I was able to pay $600 cash. And that was a deal. Normally, it's somewhere in the like $900 to $1,200 range. And I said, what is it, cash? Hundreds or 20s? I don't care what you prefer. I'll bring you either. And he's like, cash? I'm like, cash. He's like, 600. I said, done. Because insurance generally doesn't cover it. And that to me is more of a argument and a conversation about the American healthcare system than anything else, and how it just is not designed to help people that are legitimately trying to get help that can't necessarily afford it. But you can generally get people like a psychiatrist that you can work with that can generally let you know that, all right, look, we all kind of know that you got it. Let's at least start something. They're not going to give you Schedule 2, so don't even try that. But if you can get on something to help ease the pain a little bit, then a lot of times they're willing. You don't always have to go through those big tests, but if you can afford it and you think you got it, do it.
Oh yeah, the healthcare system here when it comes to mental health is a challenge and has been for a while. Even if you happen to have health insurance that'll cover mental health, it's usually something like 6 to 12 visits of kind of brief therapy, and then they're looking that everything is solved in 6 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is
it sucks that it's not. I really wish it could be, but no, it's not.
Look, I wish I had a magic wand and could just make that happen. But when you start talking about things that are happening in people's lives, or trauma that people have experienced, compounded traumas over a lifetime, you start talking about this is going to take significantly more. I don't want to say significantly more than 12 weeks, because look, some of the work I do now, we do 12 weeks of trauma work and see huge changes. But you got to get somebody to doing that work first, because it's very rare that somebody comes into you and says, I want to address my trauma. Let's start doing it right now. Like, okay. Most of the time you have to do that work of you have to do that assessment work to figure out how everything ties in, right? If somebody came up to me right away and said, I have trauma in my life, this is what I need to know. I know I need to work on. I think it would be great, but I'm still not jumping right there, because so many other things could actually be going on for the individual. And trauma looks like so many things that it's just difficult as an example.
And this is what you know. What are you missing?
Right.
Because if you know that you've been through trauma and you can accurately describe it, you're likely missing something. The brain it's a fickle beast. And
yes,
a lot of trauma, you will just forget it. You will forget a lot of it, because that's the way your body's coping with things. It sucks, because those memories will come back at the most inconvenient
time possible. Yep.
So other than preventative maintenance, right? It's like, treat your body like you would a car. And if it's been 9,000 miles since your last oil change and you're not using full synthetic oil and a proper oil filter, I'm sorry, you should go change your damn oil.
It's time to do a quick stop there.
Time to at least take it to the Jiffy Lube or something. They'll do better than nothing. I hope. But what can we as makers do? Because it is such a common problem of imposter syndrome, of the ADHD. Like, people joke about it so much. It's become the flag that makers fly. And I laugh at it too, but I also am like, oh God, out of all the things we chose this. We chose this to be our flag. Um, how can we try to deal with this up
So
front?
look, you're right. It's super common. I think even back when they first started looking at this, like I said, the kind of late 70s, 80s, they estimated that 70% of people would probably experience some kind of imposter syndrome in their life. More recently, there was a study out of University of Texas in Austin of graduate students. They took 84 doctoral graduate students and looked at how, yeah, right,
Every
looked
one
at
of them.
88%. 88% said they had at least moderate,
That is lower than
imposter
I
syndrome.
expected it to be,
Yeah, right.
honestly.
Kind of. And I thought so too. I was like, that seems low, but it's very rare that you can say that seems low. I'll go with their numbers.
Yeah.
There's a confidence index there. Standard deviation was
I mean,
something like anywhere between 95 and 81%. So I might go on that higher end and be like 95% seems about accurate.
okay,
But
but 84 people is also a very small sample
oh, it's
size,
a
to
very
be
small state.
clear.
It's a very
Uh,
small sample size. Yeah,
but,
it is.
how many doctoral candidates are you going to get out of a school a year? 84 people is a lot of doctoral
That's
candidates.
that's a fair that's a fair number of
Um,
doctoral candidates. Yes.
and I would like to call out Jimmy Johannesson here. He's saying it's obvious when Grant is really excited about a
Saw
guest.
that.
I know he's really excited about every guest, but extra. He barely comments on our comments. Otherwise, he comments on basically everything. I think you all are used to me doing solo episodes when I don't have opportunities to just take a break from talking and let somebody else who's an expert talk. And then I look at y'all's questions as ways to continue the conversation to see how can I build off of what you guys are saying. Don't worry, I am looking at them and reading them, but you also rabbit holed into something about removing 3D prints. So I was letting y'all go through that. Um, it's a Matt Kai's saying the difficulty my wife and I are having is finding a therapist that accepts our insurance. We can't afford to
Yeah.
do it without insurance. Go to OpenPath. There are other places that you can look as well. Psychology Today is another one where you can search
Yep.
based on actual
I,
insurances.
yeah, I believe the American Counseling Association, the ACA, I think it's ACA.org if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, has a therapist lookup as well, where you can look. I believe they have it so you can look by insurance. Also, each state has it's like a 211. So
Okay.
you can either call 211 or usually it's 211, like the state that you live in.org. They usually have a website, but go to just put 211 in Google, and it is oftentimes a resource that helps people connect to mental health therapists or doctors or all. It's a resource for services within each state. So 211 can be extremely helpful for that also.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
the other thing is, if you see a therapist who you think you might connect with and they may not take your insurance, you can still reach out to that therapist. For a therapist to get on insurance, they need to be paneled, which oftentimes is kind of an application process and a question and answer process that therapists will go through. So if you think it makes sense, you may not be the only one reaching out to the therapist and asking them if they've been paneled or if there's anything that's been updated for a particular insurance. Might lead to them doing it because you might be the 37th person that called them and said, I've got this insurance, I'd love to see you, but I can't. So that can move people in that direction also.
Absolutely. And shout out to A Buzz Designs for the $10 super chat saying, thanks for highlighting mental health. Mods, let's drop the links to A Buzz in the chat once again.
Oh yeah,
get
they
those
were
call
there.
to
I saw them
actions.
earlier. Mods were all over that.
And of course, don't forget to like the stream if you guys are watching this live. Thank you for your support there as well. Duff says that 3/4 probably enjoys the silence. That's she is outside right now, so that I don't know. Maybe she probably does. But she I don't talk in my sleep most of the time, so that's I don't sleep a lot either. But
there's that.
there is that.
So one thing to make sure to tell everybody about this is, there is no official diagnosis for imposter syndrome. So the book that therapists counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors use the DSM-5 in its
Yep.
current edition, doesn't have a diagnosis for imposter syndrome, nor does the ICD-10, which is those diagnostic codes for all kind of health disorders. So it's not an official diagnosis of imposter syndrome, but you see it connected with a lot of different diagnoses. Anxiety in particular is one of them, but you also see the connection to depression. So if you're feeling imposter syndrome, right, you're most likely not going to go to you're not going to go to a therapist and get a diagnosis of imposter syndrome. What
Yeah.
you're going to get is something probably on the anxiety spectrum or possibly even the depression spectrum. So I don't want people to be shocked. Oh, no, it's absolutely fine. Like, I just don't want people to be shocked. Like, I don't feel like I'm good enough. I think it's imposter syndrome. And then their doctor's like, well, it's probably generalized anxiety, you know, or their therapist is like, it's probably generalized anxiety. Going back to the discussion about healthcare in this country, the way that therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists get paid is through the diagnosis. Yep. So they need to give you some kind of diagnosis in order to be charging insurance companies.
And that's okay.
Absolutely.
It's okay.
Absolutely.
Look, having generalized anxiety disorder does not mean that you're, you know, a powder keg ready to explode. Having bipolar, right? There are so many levels of bipolar, of generalized anxiety disorder, of depression, right? It is a sliding scale of to
So one of the things I love to tell people when they do hear a diagnosis for the first time is a diagnosis is just a category. Yep. It's a combination of different symptoms. So if you've opened the DSM-5 ever in your life, or the 4 or the 3 or whatever, if you've ever gone into a DSM, it is a very, very boring read, as is the ICD actually, right? But it tells you, it is to get a diagnosis of generalized anxiety, you have to have this many symptoms in cluster A, this many symptoms in cluster B, this many symptoms in cluster C, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have, more often than not, it's like 1 symptom here, 2 symptoms here, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't mean you need to have everything, right? And so if you get a diagnosis, right, the diagnosis is literally just a code so that things can be billed, and to help your therapist or whoever, your mental health practitioner, think about the symptoms that you're experiencing and how they can relieve those symptoms, how they can do the work with, and I don't want to say they can relieve those symptoms, how they can work with you to address those symptoms that are bothering you, right?
Well, and this is why I choose to pay with cash. It is more expensive than using insurance. Not that I have good insurance, because I can't afford good insurance. But I choose to pay with cash because those diagnoses stay between me and the therapist. If I don't give them insurance, they don't report anything. And with how healthcare in the States has been attacked, and is likely going to be attacked given that it's midterms in a couple of days, and it literally depends on who comes out victorious in midterms as to how healthcare gets attacked. It's one way or the other. I don't want to somehow be disqualified from future care because, oh, I've been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. Guess what? Everybody in America can probably get diagnosed with it. Why? Because it's America.
Okay. There was a comment earlier, and I'm going to scroll back up to check real quick. It was Duff who said diagnosis isn't hard to get here. Autism, I think, is being overdiagnosed since it's an extra check from the government parents get. I would agree there are things that are overly diagnosed, and you see this happen in spurts.
ADHD is overdiagnosed.
ADHD is hugely overdiagnosed for a number of different reasons. But autism, and especially autism spectrum disorder, well, everything. ASD is now your spectrum in the DSM. When you read the criteria, just about everybody could fall on the autism spectrum. Like so it's not hard to overdiagnose ASD, just because of the way that it's written.
Duff is saying, better over than under. There are some cases of that, but I would say maybe not always, because especially if you're just diagnosing it and you're choosing let's go to counseling, let's go to therapy, let's talk it out. versus medicating, because it is
Right.
very, very easy to over medicate people in a way that turns them into a different person, whether it's the zombie side of it or it's the, crazy hyperactive side of it with too many stimulants. That is also a problem. Now, maybe not necessarily duff's up in Canada, maybe not necessarily in Canada, but it is a huge problem here in the States of doctors that will just write prescriptions
Yeah.
just because.
Yeah, and ADHD is absolutely has historically been one of those that you see
Mm-hmm.
overdiagnosed, and it's actually pretty. It can become pretty clear pretty quickly whether or not the diagnosis was correct when you give a stimulant medication to somebody who doesn't need a stimulant. They become overstimulated versus providing a stimulant medication to somebody who has ADHD and the medication works on the correct receptors like it's supposed to, and you see that individual calm down. Um, I used to joke for a while that you want to know if a kid's got ADHD, give them a bottle of Mountain Dew and see what happens in 20 minutes, because that ADHD meds typically are stimulants.
Mm-hmm.
Adderall, all of them, even XR, the long
Yep.
lasting Adderall or the time release Adderall is a stimulant, right? Ritalin was a stimulant. There are very few that actually aren't stimulant medications.
I mean,
Um,
Ritalin was so overdiagnosed, it was the subject of a South Park episode.
uh-huh.
And as soon as something becomes an episode of The Simpsons or an episode of South Park, we should probably be looking at it ever so slightly more.
Probably.
Yeah.
They're good social indicators when you think about it in that way. But yeah, so you provide a stimulant to somebody who doesn't need a stimulant, and they become overstimulated. You provide a stimulant to somebody who does need a stimulant, and you see the overstimulation drop. It's just it's the mechanism of action around the medications. So it's usually pretty quick to tell when they're like, yes, I need Adderall for my child, and 2 days later the kid is bouncing off the walls on 5 milligrams of Adderall, and you're like, no, you didn't need Adderall. Something else needs to happen there. So
Maybe some discipline might help.
that again, whole different podcast episode, but we can chat about that. That is a
you know,
lot of the focus of my current work. So
discipline would solve like 85% of the problems that we have in schools these days. Hey, look, let's go back to letting teachers paddle the kids. I'm kind of for that sometimes, because sometimes they ain't getting it at home. So maybe they just need to have it at school. And a little public humiliation goes a long way to straightening somebody out. Unless there
lots of
unless there is an actual problem, right?
lots of possible solutions. Again, this is a whole series that we could be chatting
Absolutely.
about
And
raising children in the 2000s.
oh god, yes. And Duff is saying that his wife was the victim of over medication on the anxiety meds. When she stopped taking the meds, the attacks stopped. Don't be afraid to tell your doctor or whoever's prescribing you the medicine, I don't think it's working, or I am having adverse side effects.
Yeah,
Because if you don't tell them that, they don't know. And
yeah,
if they don't know, they can't help you.
you got to be an advocate for yourself when it
Yeah,
comes to doctors, to therapists, to any mental health, to any health in general. If you're not advocating for yourself and being honest about what you're experiencing, your doctor, your therapist, whoever is only getting half the information, and so you're only going to get half the expected benefit that you could, if that. I feel like half might be a bit generous there. So
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
it but ultimately, even if you're in an adult stage, right, and you want to go see, is there anything that I can do, that first step puts you ahead of like 80% of the population. The fact that you're willing to say, you know I could use a hand. And the BetterHelp has been pushing a lot of ads in my direction. I don't know. I have a therapist, BetterHelp. I don't need another one. But their ads are actually really good. It starts
Yeah.
off when one of them's like, I didn't think I needed help. I'm like, damn it, that's a great one, because they're trying to put people who are in that exact scenario in those shoes. Now, these are also the same people that probably just skip the ad anyways, but it is one of those cases of, yeah, go get help. Now, BetterHelp was the subject of some pretty hardcore issues a while back with HIPAA, and
Yep.
go do your research before you decide. But For
as
me,
always.
it is always about having that personal relationship with somebody,
Well,
being
yeah.
able
So
to connect with them, like you said.
yeah, so we chatted about that earlier, right? That connection being the important part, and we started talking a little bit about seeking out mental health.
Yeah.
And when people say, oh, you should really go see a therapist, how likely you are to do it at that point. People always respond better when it's their own idea. It's their own belief that they need to do this. And I think BetterHelp and their commercials are helping with that. I believe it's the BetterHelp commercials where there's one of a guy who's in a gym and he's trying to bench too much weight. And somebody runs over and is like, dude, let me help you. And the guy's like, no, you don't know me. You don't know my family. I can do this. Right. And it's that kind of thought process that when people see it for themselves and go, oh, maybe it is a good idea for me to go to therapy, that they are far more open to the experience than 800 people bombarding them with, you should really go talk to somebody. You should go talk to somebody. Have you thought about talking to a therapist? Like, people don't want to hear that.
No,
right?
no.
So
Because again, the stigma that is around it.
Absolutely.
And when I first finally said, all right, I need some help, it was just years ago. It was at the time my best friend. He said, Grant, I've been talking with someone. He had a death in his family. He said, I've been talking with somebody, and I think you should talk to them too. And I said, well, why do you think I need to talk to someone? He said, well, these are all the things that I was going through, and it sounds like you're going through something a little bit similar. Give him a chance. He said, you know what? If it helps, I'll even cover the first visit. Now, I didn't take him up on that offer, but I did go see that person. And it started down that path of, okay, yep, he's right. Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down, buddy. Let's go get that help. And it is once you get past that, you can start understanding and moving in the direction of getting that assistance. But for me, understanding that I had ADHD, I didn't need that test to tell me. I needed the test to diagnose it. I didn't need the test for me to understand that I have it. It was, I could look around me and still know that I have it. But and anyone that's watched my live streams could very much tell that it's a thing. But imposter syndrome is harder to detect. At least for me, it's been.
So there's an interesting, one of the psychologists who originally did the study on this, or who originally wrote the paper back in '78 on this, Dr. Clance, actually has a scale from the book that she wrote in 1985, where you can look at kind of, I don't want to say self-diagnosing, but you can look at whether or not imposter syndrome is something that is impacting you. The scale it's 20 questions long. It's Likert scale, 1 all the time, or 1 not at all, to 5 all the time. And then the scoring on it is super easy. So you just look at your answers, you add all your answers up, and then based on the total of your answers, it'll give you that idea of where you kind of fall on that, imposter phenomenon kind of scale, right? The higher the score, the more frequently and seriously imposter syndrome is impacting your functioning. So,
and with life the way that it is now, right? I would say, because of human malware, but it was moving in that direction anyways. I think that just, put it into high gear and got us there faster with the ever increasing digital world that we have, where, literally episode 100 of the podcast, it would have been season 2, episode 4. No, I don't know. Episode 100. Go back and find it. It was with Frankly Built, a 550 plus thousand subscriber at the time. I think he's over 600,000 now. He makes Iron Man costumes that are just absolutely out of this world. Amazing. The printing is fine. Like, he doesn't use amazingly expensive printers. He uses like CR10s and all that. He uses legitimately attainable printers, but it's the finishing work. And I think it was Jimmy, when I'd post on Twitter asking, who do you guys want to see as a podcast guest? And he tagged Frank, and Frank replied and said, I was low-key hoping that you would ask me. I would have never asked Frank, because to me, Frank is way too big of a guy to even want to bother talking to me. And to him, he's like, this guy's got too big of a podcast. And we legitimately talk about that. And we talk about that's imposter syndrome. And literally a perfect example of it. But you know what? It still friggin' happens, right? It
Yeah.
still freaking happens to this day to me. And I struggle with, okay, I know it's occurring, great. Other than I'm gonna do the you've seen Tommy Boy, I hope, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Am I gonna Tommy Boy chicken wing it, or am I just gonna walk away? Right? Which am I going to do? And if you don't know the reference, go watch Tommy Boy. It's a great movie. Chris Farley, David Spade. It's a classic. Okay,
Yes.
just go do yourself a favor. It's a great movie to laugh to. But unless you find yourself very much in touch with Tommy, and then or first half of the movie Tommy, second half of the movie Tommy's awesome.
Different second half Tommy. Yeah.
Yeah, different Tommies. But it's like I've talked about sponsorships, right? We're looking to bring on a corporate sponsor or two, and one of the comments on the video was, "Oh, I can see why you don't have any corporate sponsors. Your content sucks." I'm like, well, boy, and I think my reply was, boy, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. And hilariously, we have had 2 companies reach out. Now you have to figure out what the hell it's worth. My entire week last week was figuring out, what do these ad integrations look like? How much money are they worth? And could I have reached out to Taylor, Nero 3D, who was literally in one of my videos last week? If you all didn't see, he was Dave Randolph in the Printed Solid video. Joel Telling was in the background for a bit, and so was Joe Prusa. Could I ask any of those people? I could. Have I? No, because I don't want to bother them. And that is imposter syndrome. I don't want... These are people that would be likely more than happy to answer my question and would keep all this, anxiety that I'm dealing with, trying to come up with a number that doesn't undervalue myself, undervalue the industry, and also allow room for growth. I could call them or text them or DM them or whatever and solve this problem in 10 minutes. But instead, I've taken the long route, which is try and come up with numbers for different companies, decide how I want this to work, and go from there. When I could just say, hey, Taylor, do you have a sponsored deck that you could send me so I could just kind of get an idea of what I should be charging? And I could get it in probably 2 hours.
Yep.
That is like
right back to the rugged individualist. I need to do this all myself. I can do it all myself, and if I don't, it reflects on me poorly.
Well, and that's one of literally the subjects for me to talk about with my therapist tomorrow.
See, there you go.
Because and thankfully, the one company that's like crazy that really wants to sponsor us, I am phenomenal friends with. So when I said, I would love to work with you guys, and instead of giving them a BS number and seeing if they would take it, I said, I have not put any thought into what this looked like because I didn't think I was going to get this response. So I'm going to need some time to figure this out. Give me a bit and let me get back to you. And they totally understood. Yeah. That to me said, boy, howdy. Now I really want to work with these guys. Because they totally understand that things are going to come up in life where I was saying this to see if maybe I could get some comments of people with companies, right? Of course, our Patreon Discord server was like, you should take a sponsorship from Raid Shadow Legends.
Oh, God. No.
Have you looked at how much they pay?
No.
No. The low end is $1,000 for one integration. It's $1,000 for 30 seconds of my time, Nick. Think about the per hour rate of that.
Yeah.
To be clear, we are not in communication with that company, but that's why YouTubers do it, because the low end.
I know. Yeah, I know. I mean, throw enough money at a problem, somebody's going to do something about it.
I mean, that's fair.
There was an interesting, Duff asked, do some people with imposter syndrome get to a point where they question their own reality? There is some actual, some tie into neuroses a little bit. And that's one of the scales that they kind of look at around imposter syndrome as well. So yeah, I mean, with about anything kind of cognitive, there's always that chance that you go too deep down a rabbit hole. One thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And
boy, we don't
at
do
some
this
point,
in this community.
No, that never happens.
No,
I mean, it's super, super rare in a baker community that happens. But yeah, I mean, you can, as with anything, it can kind of get taken to extremes, and people can start to question their own reality. I might even argue that the second that you start, you kind of move down this road of imposter syndrome, you're already impacting your own reality, because reality is saying something opposite to what you actually believe, and then therefore there's a little bit of a distortion.
I mean, literally, it's like reaching out to content creators. You know, like we always like yesterday at Orlando Maker Faire,
Orlando Paper,
there
yeah.
were 4 different people that came up to me, and there were at least 3 others that very clearly recognized me that did not come up to me. And I didn't want to call them out, because if they really wanted to stay private and not, have me recognize them, fine. But then there were ones that, like, there was one that saw Amber and I in the parking lot when we were getting all of our gear together to walk in. And I'm like, I told him straight up, I said, I do you want a photo? I have no idea how this works. Just like, are we supposed to get a selfie? Do you just want to say, hey, do you have any questions? I'm still confused about how this works, because in my mind, I'm like at 7,200 subscribers. I am not special. I am nobody special. I am just a dude who talks a lot that wants to share it with the internet. That's all that I want to do. And the fact that people enjoy it, that do kick a couple of bucks into that creator fund. Shout out for the Patreon, of course. It still blows my mind that anybody wants to support us at all. And that's imposter syndrome too.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because you have all your evidence is to the contrary. 7,200 supporters, and I don't know all the numbers for the channel, but the constant content creation, the support, feedback that you're getting from folk, even stuff that we've talked about here, all highlights there is a level of professionalism, there is a level of mastery there, and to continue to discount that in the face of all that evidence is that imposter syndrome.
It was when we first started, I made a very critical error. Something that I don't know if anybody ever realized it. I started with a really good microphone and like proper lighting. And I very much said, I need to have good audio. I need to have okay video, and I need to have reasonably proper lighting. It has gotten way better over the years, right? The lighting is actually decent now. The cameras are better. The microphone has stayed the same. That has not changed. But had I gone the route of typical, first-time YouTuber that just uses a GoPro that they hold out that has the stock audio, oh my God, these videos would be so much easier to film. I have set a standard that is higher than it should be, but now that we've set this standard, I can't go back. We did a video where it was a vlog style video, and I was using in-camera audio, and we got comments about, why did you put your lavalier on? I'm like, well, I was driving and I didn't want the seatbelt to kind of rub on the microphone. Like, damn it. I set a standard, and now I'm also showing people that if you want to get started, you have to have all this gear. You don't have to. All you really need is my freaking cell phone films amazing video. And that's all that you really need. But you better have some thick skin, because good Lord, the comments are rough. Especially when you mention bamboo in a somewhat negative form. My God, on the bamboo Facebook group, I was being personally attacked. It was bad. Yep. And that feeds into imposter syndrome too, of, well, maybe I am wrong. Right? They're like, these machines are perfect. There's nothing wrong with them. I'm like, well, they're not perfect. Oh, you're just a fat piece of shit. You don't know what you're doing. Your content. I'm like, you've clearly not watched any of my videos. Overweight, you can have that one. That's a statistical truth. But piece of shit, that depends on which X you ask. I don't think I'm that bad. But that feeds into imposter syndrome so much too, because again, if you hear it enough, it makes you feel like it's the God honest truth.
Well, that's where it starts to get a little bit different, though. Remember that example I used of Malfoy and Hermione at Hogwarts? That's kind of what we're getting into. When people are telling you something that all evidence to the contrary doesn't suggest or represent, then it's not necessarily imposter syndrome. Then you start moving down the road of something different, right? So if you have 7,200 people, right? And let's say 6,500 of them are like, this is the greatest podcast ever. I've never heard it. It feels good. It feels great, right? And maybe it's not all that far, but it's Nice work, keep it going, enjoy the content, da 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 da. But you have 700 people who are like, this is crap, you're fat, you're overweight, you've got a stupid sounding voice, all that
All of those
crap,
things
right?
are true.
I know, I've left all those comments at some point or another, Grant. I mean, I just want to keep you on your toes. But the evidence isn't landing on that 700 people, right? It's landing with the 6,500. And so you start to weigh that out and you go, well, which one of these do I want to hold on to? And it feels good to hear something. It feels great to hear great things about ourselves. It feels horrible to hear, negative things about ourselves. Yet we typically gravitate towards that negative sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And especially, if it's disproportionate in one way or the other, right? We're always looking for something that fits our own bias in some way or another. So, if you do have a little bit of that imposter syndrome, if you do have that, I can't believe I'm doing this, I shouldn't be doing this, I'm not good enough to it, you may be gravitating more towards some of that negative stuff. Like, see, this is the evidence that's telling me I shouldn't be doing this, and neglecting all that stuff on the other end of the spectrum that's saying, no, everything you're doing is great, right? It would become more of a problem if you gave in to those 700 people and you were like, okay, I'm going to stop producing because I just can't do it the way that everybody likes. Well, if you ever find that, please tell me what to do that everybody likes.
Well, I mean, here's a great example, right? I am looking at our Friday video, the video that came out on Friday. I have found that if I mention bamboo in the title, we will get at least 40% higher views. According to YouTube, this video it's got 356 views, which is 144 less than usual. It has a spread of where my usual video views should be, and it has got 21 and a half less watch hours than it should. And for those that are wondering, a 356 view video has an entire total estimated revenue of 96 cents. Yeah,
oof, raking in that money.
Oh God, let me tell you, the amount of money that I make on YouTube is not even enough to pay for half of my editor for a month. But you don't do YouTube as a business unless you've got a lot of money to burn to start, because it is going to take a while. But I can also then look at my metrics and say, okay, we put out a video on Friday. It didn't do great according to YouTube, but we gained 24 subscribers on Friday.
Right.
And on Saturday, we gained 20. We didn't put out a video on Saturday. Why? Because one of the podcasts is going vertical right now. A podcast from like 4 weeks ago is going vertical.
Yep.
That's just the way the content algorithm works. But I'll tell you, it hurts. It makes me feel like I did a bad job when all the metrics that I look at to determine how good a video does, do people like it, are they watching it, and how long are they watching it for? If all of those tell me they're not clicking it, they're not watching it, and all of that, well, then is the video any good? YouTube is bringing, and I think the right term, I think Mad Cat said, is cognitive dissonance. Yeah. It is basically saying, well, 356 people watched it, but your normal is up near 500 by this time. You clearly did something wrong. What was it?
Well, so that actually ties to, there's another comment from Lost in Tech, it says imposter syndrome. Yep. Yeah, it's hard not to with some of the talent, the 3D print scene. That would be my question. How do you deal with being average in the creator sphere? I want to throw out there is nothing wrong with average.
Yeah, I'm not Filament Frenzy, okay?
Yeah, there is this concept that average is bad. And average is not bad. If you know anything about statistics, right? Something like 95% in a confidence interval will fall in the average range, with the other 2.5%, on either end of the spectrum there, right? So average is okay. With statistics, I believe. Oh my God, I'm going back to a statistics course, but within one standard deviation is 66% plus or minus, right, of the average. One standard deviation is 66% of the entire population. Within two standard deviations is 95%, which means most everything is within 95% of average. It is okay to be average. It is perfectly acceptable to be average, right?
But I don't want to be average.
But you don't have to. But that's the thing. I don't think you have to stay there, right?
Okay.
there are things that can be done. You can continue to work. You can, research.
We can finally do that hot tub live stream we've been talking about.
Right. There are lots of things that you can do to move yourself up from what you believe average is. And I think that's the other problem. Average is very differently defined for a lot of different people, right? You're talking about 500 videos, YouTube saying 500 watches is average, right? If I put content out now, 500 people would be far above anything that I have ever done. And so mostly because I haven't done anything. So if I got 500 watches, I'd be like, apparently, natural genius. I pick everything up easily and just moving on.
That's what Adam is saying. He said, you may have 7,200 now. And I looked at 7,293 if we're going to be specific. I'm
just round that up to 73. Come on, man. What's wrong with you?
More people just need to subscribe and like the videos, I guess. You may have 7,200 now, but I'm sure that you will have a lot more 12 months from now. And, the metric that I use for that is the Father's Day episodes. Every Father's Day, I have my dad on the podcast. Not just so I can, talk to my dad, but, no one's getting any younger. And it's a great way to kind of preserve family the way that they are right then and there. And my dad has had some really cool couple of years. So if you've never met my dad, and you want to meet my dad and see where I get my shitty sense of humor, you can go listen to the Father's Day episodes. But the first one, I think we had barely cracked 1,000, or we were very close to 1,000 subscribers. The second one, we had just crossed 5,000. Yeah. So it is exponential. It is not Mr. Beast level of exponential, but again, that is a 20 million subscriber channel. And to give you guys an idea, just so you can get an idea of how much YouTubers make, on average, it is $2,000 per million views. That is how little YouTube pays out. Yeah,
I think Stuart in the chat just said how to make 10,000 on YouTube, invest in 100,000. That seems about appropriate.
Yeah, no, that's that is on board. And that's why you see creators doing merch. That's why we're looking at merch. That's why we're looking at, the Politician and other products that we can utilize to peddle our own wares, be able to make more profit margin out of it.
Not to go too deep into this, because this is definitely not my realm, but I think multiple avenues, multiple income streams makes the most sense if you're looking at YouTube as one of them, not as the sole one. So.
Well, and that's business. And as Zombie says, YouTube is a great advertising platform, and it absolutely is. We just got in a really cool client that found me from a live stream that I did like 2 years ago. Yeah. And that is really cool. And I'm excited for that. That's the first time we've ever had a big client find us. But I will tell you, right, I feel totally inadequate. I'm like, you found that video. Okay, well, at least I set the bar. I said on my first meeting, I said, I'm glad you found that video. That means I set the bar nice and low for you. So let's have some fun.
See, here we go. Now we're getting right back into imposter syndrome, right? Like, they found you because of the mastery of certain stuff, probably not because of the video quality or the editing or anything that happened there.
No,
they were looking for something different. And so you're discounting that source of their information, like what they were looking for, and being like, so you're not quite there, but you're right on that cusp.
The self-deprecating humor is well and alive here, right? And if I can start them laughing, the first thing we do on the call is start laughing, then you know what? We're moving in the right direction for me. You know, but that's more of how I do business than anything else. Because there have been some weird situations where you have to be able to think on your feet. But, it is one of those situations that I don't feel worthy, right? Like, they should be working with I have someone that, like, is way more qualified than me. Just, like, the guy wrote the book on how to do this. He developed the system to do the thing that these people want me to do. And I can do it, don't get me wrong, but I'm not the guy that made the book. And the guy that made the book is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, he should be doing it. And I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I just bring him on as a consultant? So I'm working on that. Where I can bring him on, and then I have him on the team. Yeah. And that's more beneficial to me.
You said that you're not worthy. And as I was thinking about this entire podcast, as I was thinking about this entire topic, like the whole Wayne's World, we're not worthy stuff kept coming up. And I kept thinking about, like, the dropping on your knees. And I think it was the first one. It's like Alice Cooper, right? They drop and they're like, we're worthy, and I started thinking about that. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're Wayne and Garth. You're not Alice Cooper, right?
Right.
Obviously. And now I feel like I'm dating myself. So younger people in the chat or listening to the podcast can have no idea who Alice Cooper is, and that's fine.
What's Wayne's World? Did Lil Wayne make a television show, or is that dating myself now?
Who knows?
Is Lil Wayne still like relevant? I don't know. I listen to
Lil Wayne got
jazz.
a guy named Garth with him now. What's happening?
Wait, Garth Brooks is rapping? What's going on?
So, I think about that kind of stuff, and the whole "we're not worthy." And yeah, it's self-deprecating, and yeah, in that case, it's about kind of meeting one of their idols or somebody that they looked at, right? But it's not it's not the imposter. That's not the imposter syndrome. That's something totally different. What do you mean Alice Cooper is dating?
That's timely. And Adam Fendon said that I did a great job on the recent tour of Printed Solid. Well, Dave Randolph was at the Orlando Maker Fair yesterday, and he said, Grant, that was a really good video. And the one thing that everybody's been saying is he is really excited to be here. Like he said, around the office, everyone said that you are very excited. And I said, well, wouldn't you be? He said, no, I'm around it all day. I said, okay. When you first bought this line, did you feel like the way that I was when I was in there? He said, for a little bit. And then I realized how much work I had to do to make it function for me. He said, no, don't get me wrong. It was awesome. The team loved it. Everyone's been enjoying it. But he said, yeah, the one thing that is consistent is, boy, he's excited. And I said, I said, I didn't put it in the video, but I put it in the comments that I was not sponsored by you to do the walk because I was wearing a Printed Solid shirt. The story of that was I had there was like a mustard stain or something was on my shirt. And I still don't know how it got there because that was a clean shirt. And I did not eat before I went to Printed Solid. And Dave said, hey, something on your shirt. And I said, oh, there is. I said, can I buy a shirt from you? He's like, hold on. He just tosses me a shirt. And I changed it to it. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. People are going to think I'm shilling. Whatever. I'll go for it. If there's a filament company I'll shill for, it would be Printed Solid or Prusa. So
I was going to say, if you had your own merch line, you would have been good to go. Just throw on your own stuff.
I only brought 4 logoed polos with me, because I was only expecting to be out there for 4 days. Right. And I was expecting day 5, which was that Monday, to be a slow day for me. Well, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
And thankfully I had brought a spare shirt, but apparently something happened to it. I don't know. Flights being what they are. But I felt like imposter syndrome because asking Nero, say, hey, do you mind doing this? He's like, oh my God, this is beautiful. I said, okay, as long as you're in, let's do this. And then we both, and I don't think we've switched the thumbnail yet. We took a paint me like one of your French girls photos, but with Prusas. We both did it. I don't think either of us have used that thumbnail yet. I think I'll be switching that later today. But even that's the thing too for imposter syndrome. Like, does my thumbnail suck? Does my title suck? And then there are certain people that'll come up to me. It's like, oh, that's a clickbait title. I said, did you watch the video? Well, no. I said, well, then how do you know it's a clickbait title? Yeah. I do pride myself on that. We don't do clickbait.
You go back to how it impacts your functioning. Right. If you stopped functioning because you were hearing those things, then yeah, you're letting things get to you in spite of,
they
all the evidence to the contrary. Of course they do.
They absolutely do. And
we're human.
I guess I'd like to kind of close with how can we deal with it? Because imposter syndrome is pretty much a guarantee. So
88% of graduate doctoral students.
I would say that's a statistical pretty much everybody, right? I know only a Sith deals in absolutes, but how when I recognize it's imposter syndrome, I don't know what the hell that I can do to get through it that won't also make me feel like an arrogant asshole. Like, oh, they're wrong. They don't know what they're doing, or something. Like, I don't know how to get through this. So I just kind of suffer through it currently.
Which is a common refrain, actually, for lots of people who deal with imposter syndrome. Look, like I said, it's super easy as a therapist. It's super easy to say, just do this, just do this, just do this, right? And
Yeah.
and I think the work comes in the space between what you had been doing and what you're being asked to do. And that's always the difficulty, right? So if you are sitting here just holding on to these negative thoughts, and I tell you, think about doing something different, right? Think about the positives, follow the evidence, follow all that stuff that's happening. That's great. But moving from one place to another is extremely difficult. And that's why I say the magic happens in between, right? And it takes a combination of a lot of different things. It's going to take, getting a little bit introspective. It's
Yeah.
going to take some work to say, not everything I know is right. And that's okay. We talked about that
What do you
earlier
mean
on.
it's not?
I
I
know,
am
I
a
know. There's a
god.
shock. There's a shocked look there. Okay, now we're moving into narcissism, and that's a totally different. There are people in the 3D printing community who I feel could go down that path, but we're not going to chat about that right
Yeah.
now.
Different
Uh,
podcast.
different podcast. Again, we're
That's
looking at a
probably one we
serious
don't put
grant.
online.
Right. So a little bit of that introspection, right? A little bit of that challenging of what you think you know, because everything we think we know isn't exactly what we know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that what we talked about earlier, reach out to others, right? Just have that conversation, people in your field or people outside of your field, right? To get that different perspective around things. We've talked a lot about talk to somebody else, right? Recognize that therapy is okay. I spend a lot of time on my couch talking to myself. Um, Whether or not that's truly therapeutic, who knows? But check in with somebody else if you feel like you need to, right? Even if it's not a professional, even if it's just somebody else and you want to run something by them, it's okay to do that, right? So, and lots is being done. This is recognized as a problem. I talked about that study with the graduate students, right? And 84 graduate students, doctoral graduate students at University of Texas, Austin. When this was recognized, the university realized we've got an issue. Like if this high of a percentage of our graduate or doctoral graduates are experiencing this, we've got to really take a look at this. And they're not alone. Other companies, other organizations are looking at the same thing
Mm-hmm.
and saying, how do we create a more inclusive, more supportive environment that helps people recognize the success that they're having, right? But does so in a genuine way. Like I don't want to, going back to that conversation about being average. I don't want to produce something average and somebody to go over the top on how great and amazing it is. I know enough about myself to know what I produce when it's great, and I know enough to say I got the job done this time and it's average. Lots of people know that about themselves. So if we're genuine about the interactions that we're having on people's work, that goes a long way, and organizations looking at being genuine with what their agency, what they're doing as an agency, what they're doing
Mm-hmm.
with their employees is moving a long way to helping to combat some of this imposter syndrome as well. So there's a lot, on the personal level, there's a lot on employment level, there's a lot probably societal that needs to be done around this as well. But yeah, that's a whole different podcast.
I find it
But you got
interesting.
I want to say that you've got at least like 6 podcast ideas that just came out of this one. Like,
But you know what's funny? Up until, and I think it might have been Mad Cat, one of our Patreon. Oh no, it was Dom. It was Dom. Because I was talking to Dom about how I really want to do a mental health episode. He's like, why don't you ask Nick? I'm like, son of a bitch, I forgot. It didn't even occur to me that I should have asked you.
you want a little bit of self-disclosure? You asked me about doing this, and I'm like, ooh, do I want to get on there? What if somebody picks me apart for something I don't know? Like, my own stuff came into it. So yeah.
Is that a little imposter syndrome though?
Oh, it's definitely some imposter syndrome.
Because you're saying things that nobody else here knows, right? I can't
Yeah.
imagine that we have a lot of mental health professionals, at least that watch this channel, because they might consider themselves crazy if they do, or if they have that kind of self inflection, I'm fine with that. That's healthy. Well, I find it interesting that A Buzz Designs, who is your wife,
Mm-hmm.
says that for procrastination, I had to put a name
Perfectionism. Yeah.
to, or for
Yep.
perfectionism, I had to put a name to what I was doing. Procrastinating the fear of a poor response from others. Then I have to remind myself of what that worst case scenario is, then do it anyway. This is someone who is married to a mental health professional that is literally talking about they go through the same thing. So you're not alone in this.
Nope.
And I'm talking to you being the person out there that is listening or watching. You are
the
not
proverbial
alone in this.
you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The what's the term that people have been using for this? The parasocial relationship you out there. You are not alone in this, and do not be afraid to ask for help, whether it is from a content creator that you really like or a therapist that you're probably overdue to see. It is within your best interest to ask for help when you need it, because as a lot of us have found, when we get stubborn and we do things ourselves, we get hurt. And while some of that pain might be temporary, some of that might be permanent. That's not what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Nick, thank you so much for having this chat. It's been it's been eye-opening for me, which means I hope it's been eye-opening for others, just to have this talk with someone who I know you more personally for your makes than I do for you professionally. And that means that we have that existing relationship. That's a lot of fun. Yep. And it's not an awkward conversation of, I don't really know you and I'm inviting you onto my podcast. But I thank you, because when I've asked therapists, they're very, very like, oh no, I don't want to talk about this. I'm like, well, why not? Well, it's just not something I want to talk about. I'm like, okay, cool. Yep.
That's fair.
Yep.
That's fair. Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out. I'm glad that I was able to jump on. We were able to have this conversation. I want to thank those that have been in the chat, just kind of throwing things out there, whether it's their own experiences, their own successes, some of the things that they struggle with, or just questions that they've had. They've been amazing. And for those,
I felt like a good chat today. There was a lot of people just having really good self-inflections. I'm like, oh, this is, I hope people come at this feeling jazzed, you know?
Absolutely. For those who watch in the future, for those who listen in the future, when it's all posted, what Grant is saying is on, right? Don't be afraid to ask for help. Recognize that you don't have to do it all yourself. We talked about that, right? That whole rugged individualist or the soloist. Like, it's not failure if you can't do it all by yourself.
Yeah.
So
don't be the tough guy. There's no reason to be. Go be the one that asks for help. It's worth it. And if you don't think that your mental health is worth it, or you can't afford it, you know what you can't afford? Baker acting. That's what you can't afford. So get ahead of it before it gets ahead of you. Don't keep brushing it under the rug, because you're going to trip over it at some point. And that trip can hurt a lot. So that's all we got for you guys today. Stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones. And as always, keep making awesome. And take care of your damn mental health. Have a good one.